Thank you so much, Navia, for that rigorous, incisive and well-researched speech. Now, moving on to our second opposition speaker of the evening, we're delighted to welcome Professor Alice Crary. She's a professor of philosophy and a visiting fellow at the University of Oxford, a distinguished novelist, a scholar of ethics, and Professor Crary's publications include Inside Ethics, An Animal Crisis, A New Critical Theory. Professor Crary, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you to the President and other officers of the Union. I'm honored to be here. I want to clarify that in answering the opposition, I am not saying that, as many speakers have pointed out, we obviously can and do put numbers on lives. I am arguing against an image of social and moral thought which is reduced to quantitative methods. And if that's what one meant by putting a number on a human life, then it is perfectly in sync with the spirit of the age. Number crunching is foundational activity of our growth-oriented societies. The main recourse, this was pointed out, of politicians and civil servants in the face of social plight and ecological crisis is the quantitative tools of neoclassically based economics. The economy, untethered to ethical ideals or ecological bounds, serves as the measure of right and life. Even self-avowed environmental and gender economists shy away from questions about whether existing socioeconomic systems' core dynamics are inimical to their aims. This crowds out crucial distinctions between rational and irrational economic activity with calamitous effects for masses of people and for the planet. Too many of us have succumbed to a scientistic world picture that makes such social intervention by the numbers seem plausible. We have, as philosopher and novelist Iris Murdoch observes, suffered the loss of a moral and political vocabulary. The last speaker said, "What else is possible?" Having surrendered our sense of form and structure in moral and political life, Murdoch continues, we lack respect for difficulties of knowing the world. No longer recognizing that social understanding calls for hard-fought historical and cultural perspectives, we have allowed the connection between art and the moral life to language and have trivialized as commodities or mere entertainment our best hopes of being reminded of who we are. Today it seems quaint to propose to nourish minds on works of literature, such as, to mention one, W.G. Sebald's novel Austerlitz, which recounts the life of Jacques Austerlitz, brought at age 4 on a kinder transport from Prague to London, and then adopted by a couple who told him nothing about his origins. A lifetime later, upon retirement, Austerlitz researches his early childhood, traces his family to Prague, and learns that his Jewish mother was interned by the Nazis, deported to Theresienstadt, and murdered. He meets his one-time babysitter, now an elderly woman, and hearing her start to count in Czech, he realizes that he can say the numbers with her. Sebald's narrative places imaginative demands on us like those imposed by understanding analogously grievous real-world harms. It also brings out that dealing in numbers is part of life, not a bedrock for it. In a late passage, Austerlitz stops at a train station en route to Theresienstadt, and is struck by the idea that, quote, the railway lines run away into infinity. This is an image well known from Wittgenstein's philosophy of the rigidity numbers seem to have when reified. And here we're invited to connect the image with horrors of the Holocaust. We're invited to register numbers' tendency when boundlessly empowered to obliterate fundamental values. That lesson is largely lost on us. We go on sanctioning social reasoning grounded in economic calculations that embody the distorting idealizations of consequentialist moral theory. We trick ourselves into believing that canny investment is an apt model for all morally laudable social effort, and that the best way to contribute is to get the most moral bang for our buck. This soothing outlook appears to justify social actors in cozying up to billionaires and centimillionaires, and it gives the mega-wealthy moral cover for continuing vast, damaging exercises of accumulation. Now they need only fund apparently philanthropic institutes filled with moral experts who attest that their largesse makes them the biggest moral heroes of all time. And this is all really happening. We live in a world in which capital-fueled growthist and libertarian extropians, rationalists, and transhumanists have morphed into today's effective altruists and long-termists who try to impress us with balance sheets alleging to show how much good they've done, but who tell us little about how their top-down projects undermine grassroots activism and destabilize political systems that can furnish more resilient good outcomes as expressions of democratic will. They tell us little about where their money comes from or about how, in lauding those who amassed it, they strengthen financial structures that repeatedly cause the suffering they claim to alleviate. And they tell us little about how they're ideologically a hair's breadth away from the cosmists, effective accelerationists, and singularitarians rushing to build AGI and colonize Mars. Excuse me. The rest of us, however, should notice these things. We should follow the money and notice that the players in these elite circles are patting each other on the back and riding together into the sunset. Except that it's not a sunset, but Earth on fire, blazing during her 6th great extinction. It's not difficult to identify the profit-driven industrial activities that fuel the conflagration. And the bankruptcy of the system of moral accounting that provides a cloak for these activities' perpetuation has repeatedly been exposed in social theory, literature, and philosophy. Yet most of us abide in the collective illusion that tweaks to the global economy will enable us to continue with business as usual under the guise of eternal green growth. There are exceptions. Youth activists, indigenous leaders, and others committed to anti-colonialist and feminist struggle see through the numbers and, in the name of climate justice, protest the fixation on market-based approaches to our problems. Paradoxical as it may seem, many of the ultra-rich are also exceptions. Even as they ramp up their destructive enterprises, they're creating markets in climate analytics that commodify environmental science, and they're using their access to information we all need to adapt for building private bunkers so that they can survive what they sometimes call simply the event. However responsible they are for precipitating the apocalyptic storms they hope to weather, however fiercely they fight to preserve the status quo, they see where the status quo leads. So, if you want to bring on the dystopias that the most affluent among us are simultaneously hastening and preparing to withstand, then by all means, go on pouring human lives into equations of accumulation. If, however, you prefer to dedicate your time to preserving the possibility of a more just and livable future for all, then you must conclude that no, you cannot, or rather must not, treat human life as a numbers game.